Oh yeah.
Good morning. Good morning, everybody.
Yeah.
Morning, Geshe Yeshe Thabkhe. Good morning, Saxina, our translator.
Good morning, sir. Yeah.
And welcome everybody who is joining us for the second teaching of Kamalashila's stages on meditation. So I have some announcement before we start. Please use the chat box only for questions. And the questions, we will go through them and select, and Geshe may answer them if we have time for that. And then for the recitations in the beginning of the teaching as well as end of the teachings, you can find them on the event listing page on the website. There's a PDF that you can download. Now we will start with the recitation.
The teacher endowed, transcendent destroyer, one thus gone, foe destroyer, completely and fully awakened one, perfect in knowledge and good conduct, of the world, supreme God of beings, leader of gods and humans, Jew, the Buddha endowed, transcendent destroyer, glorious conqueror, Shakyamuni, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. When, O supreme among humans, you were born on this earth, you paid 7 strides and said, I am supreme in this world. To you who are wise, then I bow. With pure bodies formed supremely fine, wisdom ocean like a golden mountain, fame that blazes in the 3 worlds, winner of the best, supreme guide, to you I bow. With the supreme signs, face like the spotless moon, color like gold, to you I bow. You are immaculate, the 3 worlds are not, incomparable wise one, to you I bow. Great compassionate protector, all-knowing teacher, field of merit and good qualities, vast as an ocean, to the Tathagata I bow. Through purity, freeing from attachment, through virtue, freeing from the lower realms. Unique, supreme, ultimate reality, to the Dharma that is peace I bow. Having freed themselves, showing the path to freedom too, well established in the trainings. The holy field endowed with the good qualities, to the Sangha I bow. Do not commit any non-virtuous actions, perform only perfect virtuous actions. Subdue your mind completely, this is the teaching of the Buddha. A star, a mirage, a flame of a lamp, an illusion, a drop of dew, a bubble. A dream, a flash of lightning, a cloud, see conditioned things as such. Through this merit may sentient beings attain the state of all seeing, subdue the foe of faults, and be delivered from the ocean of cyclic existence, perturbed by the waves of aging, sickness, and death. His ground anointed with perfume, flowers strewn Mount Meru, for land, sun, and moon, imagined as a Buddha land and offer to you, may all beings enjoy this pure land. Venerable holy gurus, in the space of your truth body, from billowing clouds of your wisdom and love, let fall the rain of the profound and extensive Dharma, in whatever form is suitable for subduing sentient beings. Idam Guru Ratna Mandala I
Oh,
take
yeah.
refuge until I have awakened in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. By the merit I create by listening to the Dharma, I will attain Buddhahood in order to benefit all sentient beings. I take refuge until I have awakened in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. By the merit I create by listening to the Dharma, I will attain Buddhahood in order to benefit all sentient beings. I take refuge until I have awakened in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. By the merit I create by listening to the Dharma, I will attain Buddhahood in order to benefit all sentient beings.
Oh, yeah. Do matter.
Dixon.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. That's what oh, today, Sravasti, Abbey, Kumbagi, Kamurimbuchenda, and Kindu Malhenge, so Chebe, Sensi Nanga Samalia, not to Telese. Oh, yeah.
No. So first, I'd just like to say welcome, hello to all of you at Sravasti that have been blessed here by Ken Rinpoche and His Holiness. Dixon.
Oh, yeah, tell us. That's it. This one. Oh, yeah. Oh, Tatiana. Oh, Tinica. George Banda Adisha, son later. Tinica, sorry. Carlango. What do you Korea della captures? Korea della captures. Tigbel and Dor Danise. Kanshi Ranshi something, Kibutin in Jingshi Chas. Oh, she's from Banashira. That cousin has a Kibuchungi Korsheba. Tambudel. Oh, Korea Castle. Kibuchungu de Karasam Gurasana. Korea Deva Kiwashima Hata Mi Koba. Kebat is a top now, some Nason like Mekuna, some Nason like Kawakane. Mondolami Koba Tobichel Sigurdo. Any Shala Tawapa Shala Chiniki Kewatu. Tanda Mikiwa Chupa Kewachu Trumne. Any Chibataya Longu Chimbuyan Tanda Kawashima Chibache. Tenisaba Chedi Lamdo Druadan Kawashima. Any Shangi Tondebo Misamape Sancho Sayabu Yito Tondebo Tendu Tendalia Sabako. Chinso Chesum Sira. Oh, this all just a local door. That the ring given during the Dele Samlo Casha Since. Koe Della Capture Since. Takiwa Shimangundo Lami Kobayina Ko. Tungaji Ranshin Cheresha. Negap Church Betendo. Good to give us some remato teatine. Ko Tobjet over Remedo Samne. Kawashima Hadami Kobatobayina. Meeting like Kutunga Orton. Kiakanachila Sobetunga Ore. Deba chat Menyaba Menduba taught by all Sobate, Tonga Kangan Hakura, O Tiore, Anil Hala Kibayinaya, Lama in the Ginecoya, Longu, Hal Longu, Chado Checo, Tonga Gordo. Oh, Tenia, Halaya, so Tonga in the Tanda Mabinaya, Maumban Kesade. Kawake Majing and Ruta and Kawake Majite Tongiora. Kawashima de Telekesare, some Kohaku Yore. Taking Jibwacham Gordo. Oh, Tene. Some day down Sumiji last thing you come to get a Zoya. Tungaji, Tunga, and Gure, Tunga, and the Marite. Kabanduchi Tungese. Let a Yemo be Shawan de Curbe. And the Koran to things in Suda, so many things you come back. Jebul Tenet under this day or the Kiki Zone. The Chitan who led and Yamu be Shawazi, Anthony Donnelly, sorts of the ancient as Likia Reteora. Or Chesa or Tinde to me. 감성 고아래도 간도 계자 동해지 ran신도 통해 텔라 트렌드가 기부들스거든 시베 텔라 캡처신 강시 ran시 삼통에서 ran치부시와 타바톰동게 대토베 시도는 라바섬 땡은진이 라바 시로티 라바 대추중기 라바라서 어떤 롱기들 기본적인 송거도와 어디지 소나 도스망다서
So here, as for what to begin with, as the great master Pandit Atisha has said, that being who turns their back on the pleasures of samsara and seeks for their own sake the liberation from that state, this being is the being of middling scope, the middle type of being. So last time we had talked about the being of small capacity or small scope, someone who, recognizing that they don't want to be born in the lower realms, fearing the kind of sufferings of the lower realms, engages in abandoning the 10 non-virtues, abandoning harming others, because they recognize that those are going to lead to such negative rebirths. And instead, they engage in virtuous practices, primarily the three of generosity, ethical conduct, and patience, knowing that generosity will bring wealth in future lives, ethics will bring a good rebirth, and if one has engaged in patience, then you have a form that is pleasing to others. You're able to be of benefit to others. So that's the kind of a goal of a being of small capacity, is engaging in those practices, abandoning the harm of others and engaging in virtue for the sake of escaping such a fate. But a being of middling capacity realizes that all of samsara is in the nature of suffering. So even if one is to attain a good rebirth as a human or a god in the future, that's kind of something that is really only a temporary benefit, a beneficial in terms of practicing and traversing the path, but not the end goal in and of itself, because all of the rebirths that one can take within samsara are pervaded by suffering, whether it's the sufferings of birth, aging, sickness, and death, or those of having to part with those things that we love, or having to meet with conditions we don't like, having various kinds of negativities befall us. We recognize that all rebirths within samsara are in that nature of suffering. So even gods, like the gods and the demigods, have a great deal of jealousy between each other. And even if those kinds of gods don't say have manifest suffering at the moment, they have no certainty as to where they will be born in the future. So when they are facing their death, there is that great fear of where they might fall to. And even in those kinds of higher states of meditative concentration, the form and the formless realms, although they are absent of the kind of suffering or the suffering of change, there is still the suffering of conditioned existence, that pervasive suffering that means that our existence is due to the force of karma and the afflictions. And so as that kind of karma and afflictions, impermanent, changing moment to moment, runs out, one is going to eventually have to take another rebirth and continue to cycle in this realm of suffering. So someone who recognizes that all of samsara is in the nature of suffering and turns their back on that and instead strives for their own liberation from that situation, this is the being of middling capacity.
Oh yeah. Oh, did you talk? Sanjay Sumbana, she didn't do a public temple or some roba. Oh, didn't you Tandangarazo? You debe ne Longula Soba. Roa comes some back at tennis, and the some connected you to Sadala so ne Longula so. Tunga sheets and gets a race and go out, Tunga res, Tunga Tambades. Oh, change you got some other penna. Middle session, I can't see Tunga so to your. Oh, dingle so go corande. Tata Nyelegi Pumbo Corande, Tungaji, she didn't get a race or Tata Niveso, you think Cheveresa. And I'm going to learn you the Shawaches. So Rawanke Yomara, Karina Drena, Katu Droko Drena, Tentemidua. Learn you the Shawaches, also doing out the door. And my senior Soso Soboina, Tungaji, she didn't. 서로가 이나 소소 삼로단다 서로죠 어디야 뭐도야 보면도 좀 되게 소소 샘투체 동해와 집이 와라 너는 여활은 몇 풍부가 동해와 송구도 와 속이 풍부도 동해 시시바 임베샤 서로가 돼 어디야 보면도 좀 되게 so so ya samle tonge mambu nyogo yore chowa tonge shichi gore subu cho sujima choba dushi gi tonge shichi gore samlo dandal o te ya bucho te chuma so samlo dame dan deba da mahomba shibu ko ngarajo semde so de yora san dushi gi suji pombo choya pombo dushi gi pombo sa tege tonge shichi ra number sheba pombo number sheba to thoma mewa ne che ko Miki wada tindegi pasha ki kuya yude de samlo damada koya da shi chingi tsogo de namshi chi yora namshi menge ki sato de chini ko tidu nyaya ke yo marwa tiri namshi ki pungbosi duchi ki pungbosi de le ke we chola samlo tangi miki we chola samlo tangi loma dengi chola samlo tangi o tili ya ane le si yora yiki le si yora le da ane tene nyamoto zolian duji ji pumbu sigdo kondo ngaje chama desha kondo ngaje namse desela sobata zo duji ji pumbu na dugorwa le da nyamon batata tege tunge wa chibede ajo hakogorwa tewa da mege samlo raje ko samlo damda ko rawati wange ende kondo ngaje chato densem chi so akene so tunge sura oti inde dona 소설에 풍부가가 소설다 삼로당다 삼로당다 류 코랑 내당다 삼로당다 진짜왕의 동해만 무슨 요거도와 어제 소자 동해와랑 시체 인삼 아이케와 침말하다 밀리케나 코 랭이 상화증게 동해랑 시체 딜에 만데버렸삼 다 딜에 타르에 타르바지네 토바르자삼 다 대야 년대다 랑제도 랑치비치도 타르바 토바자 마힘바 ngaranjo tekba chimbu che nyamsolange ina ranchibu koya dongele tawa digmaresa teni sosolo chendi kenchewe pamala soba o tezu chembe chama simjen tamje nyendu majurba mebe teda tamje yentungede tawa chasam teche do ene rankyon kunse yenden kundengi tungede tawa che tunggengi yenden yongengi sanje lando gine tamje shengenge sanjeje koma chineje tobarsase ta samlo chacham butang gudwa ngadu che samlo ta de chende kanja samlo ta yo mardo kewanga ma che te lebu che dugar ma do semje che ta gi gyinde te yora tende chacham bo kewanga ma chi se ma samlo ta na phamada chi de mangbu yordo ane ya samlo ta na tu ju ringbu se te yordo o ti inde jan ko kaje kale jab ko ne chabe tu ju yordo tanda ngadu mil te de 김나라에 손에 가져 대고나 깔래게 용금도 되나 신세고 되네 대화로 알아 스미스시 길ung주서 심바츠데 서바 삼데라 서바 코케베 자와투 제타야 소자 가정 고게 요네 티게 요마도 어티 디잠베 개바마 투주 마부 깔래게고나 깔래게 산제게 고반 신에게 토버 차섬 대세도네 오 택바침베 춘딩에 냠베 콜론 창주비셈 Chema maiba mane ko le chune ong wene sanje ko ba thoba chagi sam tuju ka jengona tanda namsa thop thop ma de tisam le patha che gordo yiring bu sam tane be ning thagwane thoba chagi sam sa teche tu ne kewane kewon bege sam sa tinde sam lu sikene ni chen ba shu se o de chi shuen de so tamang do che de ke ha ko san tamat.
Here, as the Buddha has said, this is the noble truth of suffering. So as he explained, when we think about the truth of suffering, this encompasses everything, our abode, our body, our enjoyments, everything that all of that is contained within the truth of suffering. So here we have taken birth as a human, and as a human, we are subject to the sufferings of birth, aging, sickness, and death, all of those kinds of sufferings that we enumerate. But when we really think about it, these aggregates on the body and mind that we have right now are really the basis for our suffering. So here we recognize that the current aggregates that we have were appropriated, were taken up due to the force of our karma and afflictions. So the very physical form that we have came about due to those karma and afflictions. And if we take each of these aggregates individually, we can see our form aggregate is the the basis for a great deal of suffering. We experience physical suffering on the basis of this physical body. And then we have our feelings, our kind of inner thoughts. Our feelings lead us to all sorts of sufferings in that when we think, oh, this feels good or this feels bad, and we react to those kinds of feelings, that too is within the nature of suffering. So again, these appropriated aggregates that we have taken up due to the force of karma and afflictions are all five of them in the nature of suffering. So if we look at our aggregate of discernment or the, discrimination, it's sometimes called, but the way that we think, this is this or that is that, those kinds of thoughts, again, are tied up in our normal way of thinking that leads to more suffering. So when we think about our aggregate of discernment or discrimination, we recognize that this too is the basis for creating suffering, for experiencing suffering. And then we have our aggregate of consciousness. This consciousness has been here since beginningless time, and it is the basis that takes on the sort of imprints of all of our various actions, our virtues and non-virtues and so forth. And really, consciousness is that which creates our experience of suffering. If we didn't have consciousness, something that is not conscious is not able to have kind of feelings of suffering or pleasure and so forth. So our aggregate of consciousness too has that nature of suffering, again, being that it's the basis for giving rise to our various afflictions and so forth. And then we look at the aggregate of conditioned formations, our karma, the kind of mental activities that we have created. So when we engage in various mental afflictions, things like anger and covetousness, hatred and jealousy and so forth, those kind of afflictions leave imprints, leave these kinds of imprints of karma, such that we are going to experience those suffering results in the future. So out of our afflictions, we create karma, which then leads to a continued kind of suffering. So our very body, our very way of thinking, the feelings that we have, we should recognize that all of this is the fundamental basis for experiencing suffering. So even if we are born again in the future as, say, a human, we're not going to go beyond this nature of suffering. So a being of the middling kind of scope, a hero or a solitary realizer, recognizes the situation and wishes to be freed from that kind of suffering on the cycle of samsara. However, if we are a Mahayana practitioner, if we are studying Mahayana Dharma and practicing Mahayana Dharma, it's not okay to just think of only ourselves, but rather we should recognize that our mothers and fathers, all of these beings that are within the world, have been close to us, have been our dear mothers and fathers and so forth. And in order to be able to free not just our own self from suffering, but all of those beings who have been close to us, we should wish to attain this state of Buddhahood, wherein we have removed all faults and gained all good qualities, know all of the points of what is to be adopted and what is to be abandoned, such that we are able to benefit other sentient beings. So we should think, we should set this kind of motivation, thinking, I will attain that state of Buddhahood, wherein I've removed all faults and gained all good qualities for the benefit of all sentient beings. But we really need to have a vast kind of mindset, a long-term sort of mindset. We're not talking about just this life. The body that we have right now, the sort of human body that we have, is something very temporary. This process is something that will go on lifetime after lifetime. And so right now we have this kind of rebirth where we have the opportunity to engage in positive, virtuous practices. So we shouldn't get lazy. We should rather use this opportunity. So even if we don't attain Buddhahood in this lifetime, with this kind of long-term, long-thinking motivation, we think that, well, even if I have to work for a long time, even if I'm going lifetime after lifetime, I'm going to strive for this goal of gaining Buddhahood. So we should set this kind of motivation, again, even if at this moment we don't yet have fully authentic bodhicitta that is uncontrived, we should sort of fabricate that, contrive that, give rise to that attitude, and really try to think that I'm going to use this lifetime, but also many lifetimes into the future to attain this goal.
Oh yeah, that question got rich inside. Tamje Kimbani Toban Dungegi, Tibetan Bull Consultants to Gays on Budwa. Oh, any, the Tobjeki Juliani, Jungores. Jebu de Toban Duvayena, Jebuti Toya Julis Angora, Jebutin Devamana, the mayor Julis Angordo. As the church on the Dunga Papa Tambos. Then you couldn't Papa, they you did it das and I'm saying you didn't want to teach education, but Tension Japan Juma good deal back with a and it could the man I gave Maris, because he's going to share the share yours. Two Mabalia, Tamjin Bekova in a top to Mare, Namja top to Mare, Sanja Yukova top to Mares. You are. Two Mabalia gave you enough. Any Chamanam breakups and Kurtangular, you Mabalia yes. The Chiriba, the Geshe, too many killers in the Yorno. Two Mabalet and Kiriana, Mobile condition and could you many Kiriana? Two chick to Kena, two Tamja the Kewure. Yarga Kiriana, Kunga Kewure, Karesne, do your Marwa. Kunga Kigimana, Yarga Kigimare, do your Mare. Yarga Kunga Megibina, could you Yubatasha Sarwa? Capsuli Kigure, Capsuli Kigio Marno, and it could have given to Saguardo. So that you may have let any Kebaina, two chick to Kena, two Tamja to Kewure, two chili Kigimana, two Tamja to Ke Mavachagra. Tagna she usually Yuna. When a Gavada in the Taya, you'll arm your arm shindo, arm kigdoa. Such is a periodico, arm kigmaro. Tagalia, arm gigdoa, arm gutombu kigdoa. The two mebal didn't give you a pearl kigure, Kazimajira. A pearl magina, two men and Majivana, and Tagala Junicoma, the Karistin, Kaba Yogura. Usually make you a take marriage. Cannot you tamjali would esora. Gashili Maginane, Rangakiwara, you Rangali Rangal Maki, two Gashili Makiwaras. Tini Kulate. What do you do, Sanja, you come on Tobalaya? Couldn't get Tokbalaya, Sangache, Tele, Bangandi, Gashi, Sanja Kovan Toba cigarettes. Someone told me to ask Sanja Kovan Tobala, Yukumana. And it didn't sound engaging a thing, a man as sang yes, I took about the song they gave in Gurakali Yagumara. O T. Dizako Sanjay Komatova, the Jumel Kiguna, Kansachi Sanjay Bashindu, Kansa Tamja San Kegura, and a Kansa sang Majeba Shindu, Kansachi San Kekwe Yomare, Kashi Sange, Kashi Sang Magena, Sanjay Jusam was on two Yorno. O teachers, Munaya, Kessha.
So here, as picking up from the topic we were discussing last time, a person who wishes to attain the state of Buddhahood, who wishes to attain omniscience, needs to make effort at the causes. So whatever it is that we want to attain, if we wish to get that result, we need to make an effort to obtain the causes. Or if there's something that we don't want to have come about, then we need to make an effort to avoid those causes, to get rid of it. So here, if we don't have the kind of causes necessary, there's no way that we can obtain omniscience without the kind of causes that it needs to come about. So here, as we have seen, in the Pramanavartika, that there are those like of the Vaisheshika school, for example, that propound some kind of causeless production. But if that were the case, we would have to say, well, if something arises causelessly, then it would have to arise at all times. If we have something, say, that comes about in the summer, if it is coming about causelessly, then it should come about in the winter as well. There shouldn't be any sort of distinction in terms of time. If something is causeless, it would come about at all times, summer, winter, whenever. So if we observe that something is occasional, then we know that it has to depend upon a cause. That establishes that there is a cause that leads to that particular result. So here, you could also take like the example of a place. So for example, in India, you can grow mangoes. Mangoes will readily grow, but you're not able to grow a mango in Tibet. It's not going to grow. And so we know know that this is because the causes are not complete. The proper sort of conditions are not there in Tibet for a mango to grow, whereas they are in India. So when we see a distinction like that, we know that there's a kind of dependency, that it depends upon a suitable cause or a suitable environment. So if it were the case that the state of Buddhahood were causeless, then it would have to be the case that all beings were already Buddhas. There wouldn't be any causes that could bring it about. It would already be, everyone would permanently be a Buddha. And so here, when we're talking about causes and conditions, if something is causeless, then it would have to come about at all times. Otherwise, if something is occasional, it means that the causes and conditions have to be complete for its arising.
Oh yeah, Kudake la tebe yena kudake chachawaji tokure kudake manoala begures kudake norola bena ani diskale kemna jebude tangi mares tugi mares tesonje kudake manoajele kore manoa kanje besema kudake chashede kaje guguyene chatamjene jebudele kudeda dekore sam shebachene 그 사실 상만 상화질로 놓고래 내 번에 돈도를 때문에고 신가다 또 강거 약보 유나야 내 사병도 지금 마담네 지금 말도 그래서 탐절이야 그만으로와 그 차상을 또 그래서 대나신 건도 한비 고바이나다 타르바이나다 산제지 고반 토바이나다 그 상화질 매고래 그만으로를 매고래서 그게 너네 teaching driven banduje so kale baba jebde teme yogardo wo teach ne sangyana pyukare bagure sed ene dege lobe kamashilo songdwa o tata bug sangye thobje ge junde da de re se de sama ngata bug laptoya yo mare tejo thobje ge ju tejo le ngata longa bure se Longa Staina, Narando Geshe Thabkhe, Sanjay Chumdende, Kutu Kanga Nyam Sulane, Sosa Nyamyosane, Sanjay Chumdende, Mashene, Sungores, Sungba de Tandada, Hako, Hako Ashene, Tiene cancellation, Shena, Nation, Shetu Grace, Tinishaking and Sungdwa, or Tiba the Sari Dangate, Tishuna.
So in order to attain a particular result, one needs to have not just the cause, but the causes must be complete as well as unmistaken. So when it comes to bringing something about, if you say have the wrong cause, you're not going to lead to the result that you'd like. And if you don't have the sort of complete causes, something may need various causes and conditions coming together for its arising. So we need to have all of them. For example, if you want to get a good harvest from a field, if you've prepared the field well and so forth, but you say don't have the seeds, you're not going to get a good harvest. Or if you're lacking another one of the proper causes, you won't be able to bring that about. So too, this is the case with whether we want to gain a good rebirth as a human or a god, whether we're striving for our own liberation or for the state of omniscience, of Buddhahood, we need to have the complete causes as well as the unmistaken causes. If one is mistaken about the causes, then whatever efforts you put into that will be meaningless. So here we going through the text of Kamalashila, he is addressing, well, what are the causes and conditions that lead to omniscience? And he sort of in a display of humility says, I who am like a blind man may not be in a position to explain by myself. So he sort of says that, well, I don't really know anything myself. You can't rely on what I know, but I can, based upon the words of the Buddha, someone who has actually taken this up into practice, I shall employ the Buddha's own words just as he spoke them in order to describe the kind of causes and conditions that lead to omniscience. So this is where we had gotten up to in the text.
Oh yeah, Teneta de Samia Churches Samia said the co Pelia Tambuda, Kindig Tayebe, Combati Gaga Udemburi, Zola Castile, Shang Betani Shangbe Songudwa, Pezzo Chungi Jingorja Shandoa, and Tinaliaco, Tessam Jinge, kom japsa yoba loza was beche kuria yoba pe jalsam shabu shanduwa oh ti shan ta ti jeli are be tsaba chong to thoba janja thoba da samba chana ya te komlo ma chung se thosam janja cheba yina ya khode yagboro oh tinga jo di journal songi wa ka te be tam ju nam ji de long da to be ta ni to tin ji che ba ma chu da tu ba che ba kona o se ri cho to o te do sa sangye ki temba da gel su de sangye chum de song sha be song de kar song do sada me ko ba thop je kyo kar song do thar ba thop je kyo kar song do sangye ko ba thop je kyo kar song do sam ti the Tiso samlo rajita jale tende son do asam tende chabe ina ko sanje tamba dan jade no te sanje tamba zengi ore thoba san me ne digma do te sanje tamba zimba do te de ko sambura to ko ran gomlo chuna komgre do komba te ko do o te de ta komba ina te ta longi tembe tanda de tinje cheba majida truba cheba se truba nyamle che komja de ko ani longi tem tokbe temban jimbe tero longi temban jing tokbe temban jing se o tinde niga teba samba komba sumga chegora ta ka kansa gashi thosam pro che komlo ma chung yena ya ko de mer ta ke yo mara ko teba chanjar ma to ke yo mara nyamle che yo mara ser nga ju shek do Nyamle get sulundra na tomba songu ore chale chapangi ore ane pamba chinde ge tubi ore chele teba chigi ore te nyamle ra oti inde digi wato oti inde ko teba da samba komba ya kansa gashe komba janja chene tende so chige mambu teba mago ina kora komda digi wato ta tenda teba ko mare namsa chende chik karbu chidup se me chik se ne naza kanga tado se ro yila me se be kyang komna sanje ko ban top to mare sanje ko ban to bala kyumang bu yores kyu chashe chim ma sana de mares chia yila ma se be se ji ta mongba de se mukba da se do sem ga ni ku ga la ma chide de me te se de ma ju yege tan da ga se nam ga ta yan nam shi ta chia me se do 지금에다 시지도 어떤데저래 삼로 땡지 그런데 생비 초아 예배선도 매배선도 되게 땡지 땡부시다 곰곰네 땡데 차도로 내 야가 그쯤도 안 가죠 사철은 문남서 깨워함시기도 하대 맞아와서시기도 사철은 물게야 돼 삼진 씹어 곰잡네 땡지 장장 곰겐주 자세 양다부가 따와시려 말을 땡지 장장 곰곰네 아니 Keba mangu tangbo kia song samsaan, tene tos te chua mengere che tos te shagiwara. Sa te hacharen bunam se kewa amsi de, megiwe malam dabgudwa. Chedan ko taga, chedan sem tembu che ke masambu che, te kya je ne, yun ringbu ka je de tune ke yo mara te, ha le chi midwa. Tile ngin chun chansi yang dabbe tawa to suli ya paksa re sha, teba chi chebe na, te kya chewa re sungu to, tengi ji tembu shebe stop na. De kadam bela ma tu songu doa chi shi de nga tanga ting ji kom de tempo se da ye shi de o kira am jo chi le nga tu na ya me go ting ji ye na chema sha ba chi ko sa chi le ke on da se ni jo chang se yang da be ta sem de ye de zo che wo de songu ra o chema sha ba chi sa ke on se de wo ti de 사체를 물어봤는데 계속나는 배깨만 못했대 처음에 저를 대도록 제일 맞으셔. 제지만 내 남이 좋으니 아니야 와이라도 가봐니 깨도 왔다. 저 대장장을 님부시야게 면도와. 어디지 소나. 어딘데 제가 맞다 터섬 검소 강간 좀 버시고 그래서 대송도 와. 제가 우된 부리서 접디제 다 개미 뒤qabla. 리네 사르지스 사바 강간 닝바 강간 매버서 강가 tor샤. nga nieto shi le de ya pe le yang ja nyen de zhe ti de pa su chen do chou ya chen do yin ba ti de ning ba de gang ga to sha de ne sa ba yang shang ge do shang do wa sha ne ning ba ge cha la sum le sha ga to ya de le cha la sum chi de do ge seng ge chi do do seng ge xian de gang ga cha chi le sha do seng ge chen bu chi do tin ding sa ba su gang ge seng ge chi wa de ma de ja ga ge dam sin yo ran dam na ja ga seng ge chi do wa 어디는 담신해야 유래지 법학이 다시도 지티도 하지 말에 뭐 못해 말에 담신해서 자가도 왜 생겼지 어디리샤 뒤에 도지 클라샤 되네 근데 초지 무슨 메시지 예비지 레샤 지원 지부셔도 배 루겹샤 그 상이 있어 말에 상이나 재미키도도 건조 상고에 근데 강가 짜지 디 잘라서야 키도 그 상이 있어 말에 초지 우셔도 옆에 되지 콜라케면 말 또르마도이나 유샤 가네 틸레디샤 되네 무디게 도스티 상게 고진갈 소상게 지주점에 당가시도와 대종바지 허가살 냐제 되는 지만이 공부야 상도 양양자야 그래서 어디 숨지 통해도가 내려서 어디서 요인데서 쇼데 다서
So here, in terms of this text again, this was written at a time when the temple of Samye was built in Tibet, and Samye was built after Udayapuri, like taking that as a model of this Indian temple that was then designed as a center for hearing and reflection and meditation and so forth. And so this is something that again is sort of illustrative of the kind of debate that was going on over the importance of hearing and reflection for engaging in meditation. So here, as Vasubandhu says in the Abhidharma Kosha, the teachings of the Buddha are contained within the scriptures and realizations. And then there is our like practice of them, our accomplishment, our taking up, holding the teachings and then accomplishing them. So how is it that we then are able to really hold the teachings of the Buddha? It is through first listening to the teachings. We have to get a kind of a grasp on what they are. And then based upon that, we engage in contemplation and finally then meditate on those. So we need to have all three of these. Just hearing something and kind of leaving it at the level of just having heard it is not sufficient. But rather when we say take up vows, we then need to protect them. We need to engage in various virtuous activities and giving up harm and so forth. So at this time, again, there was this view of Hashang, for example, that one needn't engage in hearing and reflection, but rather just meditating is enough. That by placing the mind on nothingness, by sort of placing it in a state of not thinking about anything at all, that kind of meditation is like a panacea, like a medicine that is able to heal everything. And so here, if we think about this, this is sort of akin to like the highest state within the formless realm, where we get into limitless space and limitless consciousness, and then finally up to the peak of samsara. One can attain a rebirth in such a rebirth in such a realm through attaining these kinds of meditative concentrations. But they are lacking in any sort of thought of renunciation and bodhicitta and the correct view. So although one might remain in that kind of state for eons and eons, one is going to have to then fall from that kind of an existence back into another samsaric state. So just that kind of practice of meditative stabilization, maybe we're able to remain for a long time without any sort of thoughts, but one is again going to have to go back into samsara. So this is why we sort of make prayers not to be born as, say, a long-lived God, or in those kinds of states where we're just going to remain thinking about nothingness without sort of developing renunciation, bodhicitta, and the correct view. So the real main important thing then is study, is hearing, and then contemplation that then leads to meditation. We have to have all three of those. And so as an aside, I was able to return to see Samye in 2004. And this is at a time where it had really been destroyed by the Chinese and kind of replaced all sorts of new, they had put all kind of new things, but there were sort of three things that were still the old, from the old Samye. So one of these was a stone lion, and it's a lion that's kind of in the form of an Indian style of lion, not not like what we think about the snow lion that we see on like the Tibetan flag and so forth, but rather a stone kind of lion. And then there's, sorry, I as a translator, I'm having a little trouble with this one. It's like a metal thing that's some sort of, it's not a sort of nicer bronze or something like that where they could, where the Chinese could have melted it down and used it on something else, or maybe it was too heavy, or they just thought it was junk. And then there was actually a Tara Tanka that had like kind of pearl painting on it that someone had taken away from Samye and then actually brought back after the kind of reconstruction. So the Samye that is there these days is very much sort of replaced. The things have been updated, and the Chinese, after destroying it, have kind of put their own things there.
Oh yeah. Don't have to do Sravasti dinner. Oh, tonight you can Karel Tugres and Sanjay the day social someone she shaking sorva. Oh, this Sanjay Kavasung Dosena. Penny did it. You can let the longer condition songo. Oh, Kusum Yore, Kusum de Res, Kusum de Imbasanjay Song Shase. Kusum Nalan Dudu, that Kusum de Nan Dudu, yes. Oh, take a reason. Tanya Geshe Yeshe. Some then they get Terka some then they son chas, right? Kusum Dindi, but in the son chas. Sanve Dabos, Sanve Dabos, Pam Burner, Sanve Dabo. Tamje can be shit and Ninji Zawale Chong, yes. Zawa Tambote Ninji, then Zawa Chanichon, Zawa the Massachusetts, the Ninji and go to good as Goda. Tamje can be shit in it. Ninji Zawale Chong, yes. Chanju is simply Julia Chong, you never the carson, Chanju is some. Chanju is simply Ani and Gurdon, Kunzu Chanju the same, that Tandem Chanju the same. Kunzu Chanju the same, Simjan Tamje, the troop to Genge, Sanjay Yakoba, Tobachagi, Samjage. Chanju Simdela, Kunzu Chanju the same Sira. Take Kunzu Sugula Megiorva, Tamje Ken, Pachu said to get Kansachi orva. Kunku say you and then Kundegi Shandu to get Kansachi orva, Sanjay Chamden de Tavura, the Kansa de la Sigora. Tell us Sugu Sigua Sugu. Oh, Tindu Klasoda. Or Titoban do you or no, Simja Tamje to be Sedunga, Shija Tamje Shembache. Tenisha Becone Shalia, the next shooting. Any gondola meta Tabatam Simbangova chicken some corner, Sugutan to Nigora. Oh, the Tamje, the Kuzu Chanjuki Sem Sigara, Namungan Chanjuki Sem Chanjuk Sem Saddle, Kuzu Chanjuki Sem, Kunzu Beko, Sanjay Sugu, Tom de Chigor, no tell minutes or Titom de Chigdoa, Titobechedo, Begiorno. Tandem Chanjuki Sem Siduza. Tongba Yangu Sum to Tobashi del Siwara, Tele Tandem Chanjuki Semse. Take us in a Tandamba, Sanjay Kodila Sukuta, and a Kasura, Chuguni ora, Ishichu, Oniguseta, Oniguseta, Rashin Namdag Chatubangonyu, Sanjay took Chunichora, Rashin Namdag Onigus and Sanjay Nambiang Chuni Tongba Hotel Rashin Namdag Chajibangoni Gusto, there Sanjay Kulshayora, or the Sanjay Sugut Ishichugut and the Tongbanishora, Tandamba Kuchidua, or Timosum to Tonatella Migiora, this was that Tandam Sem Yes, Tandam Sem Yes, Tandamba, Rashin Namdag Chajiba Sanjay Sem Chuni, Tongbaningusum to Tonatella Migbe. Don't some dobe said, Tandam Chanju Sem Segdo, or Tini Dida, Chanju Sem Yechera. Then, Tell Tamje Kembani, Ninji Zawale Choi, Chanju the Semgi Gule Choi, Tabji touching by Yenos, Tabs to the Chimba, Chudrim, Soba, La Soba, or the nature of a part of Chimba of the Orno. Oh, the Zolia, Tabi Paro to Chimbayes, Tabjet, Atunda, some Niji Zawase, any Chanju Sem, Kunzu Chanju Sem, that Tandam Chanju Sem Che. Oh, Tenete, Kunzu Chanju Sem, that Tanda Chanju Sem, Gaba Mabukale, Yavur, Chimba, Chudin, Soba, some day, Shida, Paru to Chimba Tola Soba, oh, the Zolia, Tabsigua, that's all the Chimba Chudin Soba Soba, oh, the Zolia. Sanko Yato, or Tisum de Sona, or Tisum de Laberchaw Sungua, Ninji, Kawara, Chanju, Sambi Kule, Tabji Tarchin by Yeno, Shejongos, de Sanje Sombe Londe to Tangdoa, Kong Tangdoa. Sanje Karkar, Sanje Sombana, Shinji Shagin, Rando Geshe Thabkhe, Sanje Karson, the Sonawati Sonshas long time. Yeah, this is
So here then going to the text, picking up, Kamalashila then again has said that he is unable to explain this by his own power, but shall rather use the words of the Buddha. So the Buddha, as he spoke, he said, and this is then quoting from a text by the Buddha, and it's going to give us these three primary causes of the state of omniscience. So he said then, Vajrapani, calling out to Vajrapani, Lord of secrets, the transcendental wisdom of omniscience has its root in compassion and arises from a cause. So here, the very root of this wisdom of omniscience is stated to be compassion. And compassion, again, arises from a cause, the altruistic thought, the awakening mind of bodhicitta, and the perfection of skillful means. So it's identifying these kinds of these three causes. So here, compassion is stated to be the root of this state of omniscience, in which one has attained the two bodies that are the embodiment of being able to benefit others. So here, when we talk about conventional bodhicitta, we have conventional bodhicitta and ultimate bodhicitta. This kind of conventional bodhicitta is the sort of thought, the striving for a state in which one will be able to work for the benefit of other sentient beings. It really has as its objective or its object the form body of a Buddha, like the Buddha himself, who had a body by which he was able to then directly benefit beings. This kind of attitude of wishing to attain the state of such a body whereby one can teach to others, this is conventional bodhicitta, observing that kind of state of the form body, the embodiment of working for the benefit of others and striving for that, is this conventional bodhicitta. And then there is ultimate a bodhicitta, which is really the wisdom directly realizing emptiness. And within that, one can talk about this in terms of the truth body, the dharmakaya of a Buddha. And this is again divided into the sort of essence of dharmakaya, and then that which is purified of those kinds of adventitious stains. So this the emptiness, the natural purity and emptiness of the wisdom of a Buddha, this is the kind of state of the dharmakaya that one is striving to achieve. So this ultimate bodhicitta then is encapsulated in the wisdom directly realizing emptiness, and is also referring to that kind of the natural sort of purity of the truth body. So here then so we have this altruistic thought, the awakening mind of bodhicitta, and then the perfection in skillful means. So here, when we talk about the sort of perfection of skillful means, this means engaging in the kind of practices of generosity and ethical conduct, the six perfections and so forth, making an effort at these kinds of practices over a long period of time with the goal of being able to attain such a cause. So here he says, again, Kamalashila has stated that he himself is not able to describe these causes, but rather on the basis of the words of the Buddha, he will explain the sort of causes that lead to omniscience.
Oh, yeah. That is the Shinjungo, the long transarwa. That the Tamje Kembani, Tobar and Debe, Ningjit, and Chanjuji Simda. Tap down Sumbun de Dala Laber Chaos, or the Sanjay Kovan Toji Tap Chasawado, or this from the Lapkuri, this Sanjay Song to us. Capji turned the Chawas, and then the cups of Karashia Guyore, Sanjay Topji Kudi Karires, Titi Ravati, Rando Vishet to my Sanjay Sumbanashi, shegi yin serwa. This Sanjay Sumba Kabdil Karusum Arisana, Ninju Chance Yanda Betawa Sumbutres, Kabji Tanda Charwa Sigur, that Jarchana, Kabdin Gitanda Shigur, that Tijuchan. Oh, Didala Labar Chaos. What did you love Sanatambo?
So then quoting, that ends the quotation from the text. And so it then continues saying, therefore, if you are interested in achieving omniscience, you need to practice these three: compassion, the awakening mind of bodhicitta, and skillful means. So here, again, as it is the case in this context, we are talking about, well, what are the causes of Buddhahood? And while Kamalashila claims he can't explain them himself, he relies upon the words of the Buddha in order to say that they are these three: compassion, the awakening mind of bodhicitta, and skillful means. So as we often see, there's the three as listed as renunciation, bodhicitta, and the correct view. Here they're listed as compassion, the awakening mind of bodhicitta, and skillful means.
Oh yeah, Tandinema Bishegura. Ninju Chance Yanda Betawa, Sanjay Sumbe, Sanjay Sumbe, and Sanjay Kovan Tobji Gusum Dua, or Gusum with the Geshe Yeshe Thabkhe, and Dinamai Chanju Ninji Kebarshe, Chanju Sem Kebarshe, or any Tab Kebarshe or not Dinama. Oh, Londi Kebarshe, or Tina and Tadam Ninji Kebarshe or no. Oh, Tishum did it. Ninji Könase, Ninji Chambodi, Rangi Kulia, Combolatani, Kesonas, you are Könas, the Chunas, the Sigore. Yonsonase, Ninji come the Ninji, the Rangi Kulia, Jonsonase, Topsonase. Chanju Semba Nam, Simja, Tamja, number Dumber, and Dumbeches, so Ninji Chambodi Rangula Kesona. Ya Rangula Combalatani Lepsona Sigora, and Chanju Semba Nam, Simja Tamja, number and Dumbeche, never Tamja and Yoros, oh Simja Tamja, Ninji Kene, Simja Tamja, Koe Dungel and Dumber Chavecheto, Newa Yida Tendro, Mila Lama El Saba, Rala Rawan Beba, and a Pumbu Kichichene, Kode Konga Kansatuzo. Koe Dongil and Dumber Chaveche Sigora, Koe Dongel Tare Tondalia, never Tamjavan Guru, Simja Tamja, Koe Dongel Tarbachi, Teach Dunga, Sanjay, Tendeche Tungenge, Sanjay Yakoban Tobachagi, some and some decade of Guare, Sungora, Sanju Sem Kiguare, Sungora. Did you let now?
So here, then, there's going to get into a more extensive explanation of each of these three causes, a more extensive explanation of compassion, then the awakening mind of bodhicitta, and then of skillful means. So he's going to give more detailed explanations of each of these, and first of them is compassion. And so here it says, then, moved by compassion, bodhisattvas take the vow to liberate all sentient beings. So here, when one has this kind of great compassion, or one is moved by, one is incited by that kind of compassion, then seeing all of these suffering beings, hell beings and hungry ghosts and animals, humans, gods, and so forth, one wishes to liberate them from their sufferings. One wishes to attain the state of a perfect, complete enlightenment in order to be able to benefit them. So that's the kind of pledge that one takes, striving to be able to bring benefit to other sentient beings.
Oh yeah, that did Akasara. Tene Tanila Tawa, O Tandi Terida. Oh, Niji Kena, Sanju Semba, Nam Semja Tamjangoban, Dumba Chavi never, Tamchawar and Guru Sungdua, Dita, Churches out Ninji. Sanjay Yakoban to be churches tower is Tishigo and Dinama. Churches tower, that on the deca shows a Randangi, churches tower de Nijires. No one my Shandangi, so the tower de Nijires Tishigora. Then they Randan, churches tower, Nijichim, Randan churches tower and used to the Shigora. Take on the Shagosana. Ningji kyo na se chanju semba nam semjen tamje ngomban dambar chawe che ngebar tamchawa yuro se semjen tamje ten trup tongge ge sanje je koban toba chagi sambudwa ten de zan ko semjen tamje ge ten trup tongge ge langdo ge ne tamje kengen ge kansa jilen jora chagi samlo de korto go do chanju sem keto go do kende ko rande tamje kembe koba rande chugu shara 이시 주고당 원이 고스 랑게 당게 랑게 고들이야 랑도 게네 탐제 타친 바 켐바데 지라 랑도 이시 주고라 에네 랑데 이시 주고다 다 빵바차 이슬람네 그래 시제 랑도 게네 말루바 켐 랑도 게네 말루바 켐바라 몽베 뇽무바다 시제 트바 빵베 빵바요라 세베 세바요라 어때니 레치다 랑도 예고스도아 Rantin Chawardon, Shansim Jing, Trup to Balera, Tambungela, Susu Kanga, Turtuya, Kujindi Kanga, Shimbache. Any 3 Rani, I came to the Kangapa man, Lando Lamong, Mombat Pasan, and Pambasco. Says that day, Ningji de Randon, Chugit Sawan Yoguarese. Rangi Shaja Tamje Shan, Tamje Seba, Chia, Zon Drogres, Karesan, Tambungela, Rangin Langdo Genia, Tamje Shimbache, Rankin Tamje. Mishiba Momba Kanga Seba Machana, and Shangi turned to be Kanga Tarsimba Tutu Mardo. But in the Randon, Ninji Randon, Shagi Sawares, Tishegdwa. Oh, the Ninji Komna, Sanju Semba Nam, Semja, Tamja, Number Dumber Chaves, and never Tamjawa, Euros, Sanju Sem Gigres, you are not, says Randon. Chegi Tawa Teres, Ninji Sambuto Randin, Chegi Tawa Yuguares, Tishegua. What did you go now? Oh, do now, Samara.
So here, first, Kamalashila is explaining that, as it says in the sentence, moved by compassion, bodhisattvas take the vow to liberate all sentient beings. So the very root of dharma, of our being able to accomplish our own aims as well as the aims of others, is this attitude of compassion. So when one has that kind of compassionate attitude, one then recognizes that one needs to attain a state of Buddhahood, wherein one has removed all faults and gained all good qualities, and knows all of the points that are to be adopted and abandoned, such that one can teach that to others, such that one can be of benefit to others. But in order to do that, one needs to attain, as we've talked about, the sort of embodiment of one's own aims, which are the wisdom truth body and the sort of essence truth body. So based upon one's knowledge of the path, one proceeds through these various stages in order to abandon all of the obscurations to omniscience. And once one has actually actualized that state of omniscience, and this is again encompassed in the sort of the truth body being the sort of manifestation that comes after the abandonment of these obscurations to omniscience, one is able to then attain one's own aim in the form of the wisdom truth body, and then subsequently the aims of others in terms of the form bodies. But it's based upon having that kind of first root of compassion, and then making this sort of vow or pledge that one will free other sentient beings. And this is the way in which one progresses.
No, yeah, Tene Chimbuke, Chanjigo Semkedu, Roa, Tene, Tani Latawa Senes, Kansa Chanju Sembate, Rani Latawas and Rachevan Zimbabwe Passenes and Gora. Santanda Bado, Chanju Samba Manga, Samsa, Ranto Chigurdo, Rando Chigure, Kibun Dingdabjina, Rangatan, Tor of Chigurdo, Rand Tabato Gusamburdo, or the Chanju Samba Tender membership. Tenese, Tani Latawa Senes, Rachibul Tawanga, something Rachibans in Bechin the Passenes, Shindu Chaka, Shanche Banzurita, Rale Shanke what's in it. Tani Latawa Sene, Shindu Kashi Kumecheba, Geshe Yeshe Thabkhe Kali Mambu Jagodon Simje Shengi Tandore Chimba Chudun Soba Samdela Soba Shindu Geshe Yeshe Thabkhe Chaka Choba Tasul Jogu Ese Tachidang Arazundane Chaka or Teodon in a Yeshe Thabkhe Kashi Troshin Jogure Daniel Tawa Sene Chaka Shi Meshaba Yurimbu Keba Mambu Sunam Daishigi Sosania Kali Jagordon Mechepa Yurimbu Trubese, Tende Chimba Chudin Soba, some day Shirabla Soba, Sanje Tobjiki Kutu Yurimbu, Trumne, Sodo, Nesonam Dashi gets all a Kuba Jogos, Sunam gets all Sambaniji, Chanju Sim, Chimba, Chudin Sabala Soba, Sambicha Tuzule, Jugre, Tisonam gets all Siva. Ishi gets all Sidusm, Midadunga, Tonta Mila Soba, Shirab Chatale, Ishi gets all Sigua. Source to Sanje Koban Tobalaya, Source Agua, Sanje Koban Tobalanga, Tambulam to the Solam Sigdoa, Sanje Koban Tobjigi in a queue, sort of pass, I and go to Solam Sigora, or Tinashita, Keba Mambo Sunam de Shigi Sosaje, and it's Sosaguyorno, or Sosas, Kawasaguyorno. Oh, Tanya is in the Shizim. To be Sunam de Shigi so. Sonam da Shigi Sola Kuba Jugose, oh, Tezuliani, Kubetone, Kashi Toshitone Jugure, Sungua. What did you know?
So here, then it continues saying, then by overcoming their self-centered outlook. So here, if one first gives rise to this kind of great compassion, compassion for all sentient beings, and then bodhicitta, the wish to attain Buddhahood for the sake of all of those beings. And then as well, bodhisattvas are trying to eliminate, or they get rid of this kind of I, this thought of I, this self-cherishing attitude, or this self-centered outlook, which is striving for their own liberation alone. And so by eliminating that kind of seeing themselves as primary or main, and really eliminating that sort of self-cherishing, they engage eagerly and continuously in the very difficult practices of accumulating merit and insight. So here, this where it says that these are very difficult practices, this is something that from our perspective, they might seem to be quite difficult practices, but for bodhisattvas, they engage in these joyously with a great deal of happiness and pleasure to be engaging in these practices. So by doing these kinds of accumulations, again, the accumulation of merit comprises those sorts of practices such as compassion and this altruistic attitude of bodhicitta, as well as generosity and ethics and so forth. Whereas those practices that are on the side of wisdom, so developing our wisdom through thinking about impermanence and selflessness and emptiness and so forth, those are the kinds of accumulations, the great store of merit that we accumulate. And as we see in the sort of stages of progression through the bodhisattva paths, the very first path is called the path of accumulation, because this is when you start accumulating, building up those great stores of merit and wisdom. So these are the practices that they engage in continuously and eagerly, sort of with a great deal of joy and respect, almost respect for the practices, and a joy, a delight in doing them.
Oh yeah, they show near the Dasanam de Shigi Sabala Shune, Nibar Sunam de Shigi Yonsu Toba Drubos, Sunam de Shigi Yonsu Toba to Drupado de Kalekan, Sanje Jebado Basu Tapsi Jagris, Yonsu Toba Drubo, Sunam Yonsu Jonas, Sunam de Shigi Sonam Yonsu Zona, and it Tamji Kambani Toba and Down. Kusaya de Sonam de Shigi so Chanju Ningji and Chanju Semda, Tabla Soba to Samara Bezu Chabina, and Drebu Sanje Kovanda, so Lagwali about the Chibati Sigora. Judy Yunanis, Drebu Yombara, Judy Man, Drebu watching Yomarton. Or the Sonam Yonso Zona, Tamja Kambani, Lado Tobatan Dor Gurose. Tevena Tamja Kambani, Sawani Ningji Yimbe. Te Tomar Combajo, te Sonza, Sanje Yukoban Tobjik, Save Gude, Ra, Geshe Yeshe Thabkhe koya Geshe Yeshe Ninji Chenpo Teres, Ninji Chenpo Yabo Komne, Chuma Mayabaya Kevachogore, Singleton. Oh, Tini Geshe Yeshe, Chayanda, Duba Leja Kache Des, oh, Tende Yimbe Kung de Sanje Kung Dangdoa, Niba Shiji Long de Charawasi Gordo, Shiji Yimba Sanje de Sondoasa. Chumden de Sanju Semba. Sanju Sembe, Che Rabdu Mambula Labar Migios, Che Yandabar Tubale Jan did the Son Shasera. Carson Dosane, Chumden de Sanju Sembe, Che Mambula Labar Migies. Chumden de Sanju Sembe, Che Chik Rabdu Sonshin, Rabdu Togbar Kina, Sanje, Che Tamja, Lagdidu Chiba Lasos. Chumden de Sanju Sembe, Tangbo, Che Mambula Labgumares, Tambo Geshe Yeshe, Chanju Ninji Chenpo de Semjala Ninji Comete, Nota Geshe Yeshe, Tambo Tele Labure, Shanda Mambula Gumares, Tisonguarda. Chumden de Chanju Sembe, Che Rabdu Mambu, Tomar Che Mambu Rabdu Mambula Labar Meja Mekiose, Ninji Chenpo Kesane Labgue Gashambu de Yordo, Tambo Geshe Ninji Chenpo Mana, and Teba Chenpo Lamji Saukara, Tutu Mardo. Chumden de Chanju Sembe, Che Rabdu Mambula Labar Migio. Chumden de Chanju Sembe, Che Rabdu Sungshin, Rabdu Togbar Kina, Sanje Che Tamje Te Lagdo Chiba Lasos, Te Sanje Do Long Jangiora. Oh, Dene Chumden de Chanju Sembe, Che Sungshin is the Che Sungshin is the Tubada Samba Chene, Soso Sheba Chene is what a Che Sungshin is. Rabdu Togba is the Tuba de Tangma de Tuba Chara, Church Rabdu Songs, Tuba Rabdu Songs, Samba da Combe, Rangi Togba Secula Keba Chess, Church Rabdu Songs, Rabdu Togba, Samjung, Kumjungi Kone, and the Togba Chess. Togba Gina, Sanje Chutamje, Te Lagte to Chiba Lasso, or Ten Beba in a Judil Bana. Sanje de Soja Lagana Vivanashes, one Donald in the Son to us, Doishi Tangora, Digi Moya.
So here, then it says, having entered into this practice. So when bodhisattvas enter into this practice, they will certainly complete the collection of merit and insight. They will take that to their perfection. So accomplishing the accumulation of merit and insight is like having omniscience itself in the palm of your hand. So if we know the causes that lead to Buddhahood, and we engage properly and continuously in those causes, compassion, bodhicitta, and the various skill and means, then we are going to be able to attain that result. It's like we have Buddhahood or omniscience in the palm of our hand. If we have those causes and are generating those causes, then we will certainly bring about the result. Therefore, since compassion is the only root of omniscience, you should become familiar with this practice from the very beginning. So here, compassion is the root of all of the rest of the various trainings of bodhisattvas. And so this is something that we should really take care to meditate on well, to strive to generate in a kind of uncontrived way. If we're able to have that kind of uncontrived compassion, then that's what leads us into all of the other sorts of trainings. So here, citing a source for this, Kamalashila then continues with a quotation. The Compendium of Perfect Dharma reads, "O Buddha, a bodhisattva should not train in many practices." So here at the beginning, when we are just starting out, we shouldn't be training in all sorts of various practices, but rather at the beginning, one should, as it says here, if a bodhisattva properly holds to one dharma and learns it perfectly, he has all the Buddha's qualities in the palm of his hand. And if you ask what that that one Dharma is, it is great compassion. So here, when we are beginning, when we're first starting out, it's really essential that we generate this attitude of compassion. There will be many extensive things to train in after that. But here in this quotation where it says, if a bodhisattva holds to one Dharma and learns it perfectly, this is getting at the various kind of stages of needing to hear the teachings, then engage in reflection, thinking about them, and finally, then meditation. So it is the case that if we make, again, an effort at the cause, we are going to certainly obtain the result, like having the Buddha's qualities in the palm of one's hand. And so if we ask, what is that one Dharma, that one root Dharma that one should engage in? It is great compassion.
Oh, yeah. That church book, did that in Yijimbo, she joins Doylong Tatalian Roda. Church book, Karisna did that in Yijimbo, she don't son to us. Or it is on good teach Lamshana.
So sorry. So this one, what is this one Dharma that if one practices and engages in, it will lead to the Buddha's qualities? It is this great compassion. So again, this is from the Compendium of Perfect Dharma, from the Sutras, giving a quotation that a source that cites that compassion is this root.
Oh yeah, Tandinema Karshegurasana. Ninji Chimbe Yonsu Simbe Nase. Sanje Chumden number Ranget, Pusum Soba, Tada Nigas, Tandima Karashegurasana, Shendon Church Tower Segura, Ninji Chimbude, Shendon to be Church Tower and Ninji Chimbude Segura. Do Shechade. Ninji Chimbu Yonso Sin Benas and Ninji Chimbude Rangular Yone, and it is Simbecon and some Jeshandaga, Chimbutum Soba, Chambana Segura. Ninji Chimbu Yonso Simbena, Sanje Jumden Ranget and Pusum Soba, Tada, Nias, Ninji Kundelani, Chimbatu Sabala Soba, Chanju Simda, Tuzul Chambala Tennis Segura, Sanje Jumden Ranget and Pusum Soba, Tada, Nias, Ranget Pusum Soba, Pangba Tartuba, Toba Tartuba, Kanga Pang, and then Tamje Diambate, Ranget and Pusum Soba. No, Ninji Chambo come the cable Tammy Mambolia, son of the Shi so sane. No, me Ranget Tamje Pa, you and then some Tamje Tobat is of Gura. Ninji Chambo Yonsambana, Sanje Chumden, Ranget and Pusum Soba, Tada Nias. Simjanji come, Tartu Bepardo, Shuban Zedos. Ranget and Pusum Soba Niesare, that any koale Tarche, so take my member Kansa. Drachina, writing by Drachim Barachina. Only show younger in Debe Yinsu Shune, Shanji Tula, so what in the laps of Jagio Maro, or Tendena, she way English sugar, Mares on Gora. Ninji Chambu, the Ranget person saw Chan, Tangaras Masuna, Social Tandani Abu to some Talucet and get attended Mares Gora. Sanjay Chundan, the Ranget person saw Tada Neja, Round Pando Punzo Neja. Simjanji come tar to be a part of Shuberde. Simjanji come the Tartu, Simjanam Dene, Koe Dongere part to Drepado, and he shangy turns and sugar some Gora. Simjanam Tartu be a part of Sugar and Zeddy, Shandons and Sugar and Zeddy. She way English Sugar Maresa. Teme Trachum Barzena. Dushi Yawari Shiva, number Shiva, nobody do say. Mamma Shiva, you say, Kana Lucian, do sing a swat and jet and do sing number Shiva, nobody do say, Chuggy Yingla Nene. I tell an agent and they show the same jet to throw much of a out and they show my race and Gora. Or they send it to the tower, the ninja, was not taking shandy turn to me, show the Rajibu, Koe, Tarbe Yingla Shune, and then Tarbe Tower along and show my restaurant. Nyandushin dosan, Nyara Trachambatu Sungora, Nyandushin do Nyangalan Debe Tronger, Shindu Shiva and Jubar and Mizedes, Nyangalan Debe Tronger, Shindu Shiva, and Shiva Tobara, and let Tungayo Marakoya, Javashasa, and Yamoyamare, Shindu Shiva Comba, Tarbe English Usare. You know, Dilly Shuja, Shugumares, or Dilly Secret, Shandu to be Sugar. Just a Shandu gets our do those. Oh, Shindu Shiva, Jugar Minze days, Simjala Sine, Yangal and Debe, Trongi Shivat is, Simjan Tongaji Nawala Sine, Sarangi Pama, the Yen, Duma Juba Chicken, Bebe, Sama Tamja Tongaji Nawa the Sine, and it tell ya around it to that use to some Shiva English Shugma Richard. Simjan was Sine, Yangal and Debe, Trongi Shiva, Yangal and Dene. Nyamo pansara, nyangel debsa nyangde toksa nyamo pansa koe donge pansara. Ni nyangel endeavor, donge endeavor, ta donge omara. Te trongi nali shu ne, shiva de, tepa member jine pe te tene, shiva ingle shu ne tawa tovar do. Minju ye tawa tendu tawa tovar wa. O dile tendu tawa tomne te ingle shu ma restara. Trongi shiva de, cha ge kambam barwa shindo, ta rindu pomvesa cha me ba denge cha ge kangbenalia shu denge na shisigre ke tongre se chanju sambake ranji butina la ne shu de pama simje tamje shendu madu je ran tende tungele ta se du shengi tonda maju shuna ti cha ge kangba memba we na do ya te mende ba na shi chanju sambake tende ma re sungora cha ge kangba barwa shendu ta rindu pomvesa te taring do pa pankres chumden de namges chumden de namge mine be nyangane debe kuni nyingji chambon mine be nyangane debe sudwa nyangde mine be nyangde su sishi tale mine ba sishi tale mine be nyangde de ya mine be nyangde sura sibe tale mine be su siba khwale tharba terwa nyomo sebe seba dira pena tingme dra chumba to nyomo sebe seba torwa this sitale nesura kasa sitale nesura shive thama rajbu koe dunge sene ne tel nese shurwa sa shive thama dere se shivanane sitale nebra sitasine koala neba ina sibadela garanzo thama sitale neterwa teme drachum badro sitale menebre de sitale neyora Sibeta koa kors degi homarde shiveta rajibu koe gewale tarneni te yisimje degiora te shitasura shivena ne tamayala chigoma da sitase oh da siji tala minebe nyande chanju sambade siba koa la lenye go rawameba negmare ene rajibu koa le tarwa samle negi homardo Sida de Sida Niger Sisi Talamene Benyang Desigora. Sita Lamene. Oh, that mirror. This was a casa. Toma Rishi Commando or Net on the Chief. Or needs Unibus and Dutchits or Dirda. Oh, member was in the tiring to Ponwe, some day they named Minebe and Young Helen Debe Juni, Ninji Chamboni and also Sanjay from then the Minebe and Young Helen Derwa, Sisi Tala Minebe and Young Dere. Nera Trachumba, Shivetal never, Shivetal and Deo Mare, Sibetal and Dever Mato, Sanjay from then the Young Dede, Sisi Tala Minebe and Young Derwa. So the Sisi Tala Minebe, Young De Tobatea, Ninji Chambon Chiguares. Uti into Danko, Shended to be a troll chicken matter, Ranchibu, Tarbet all a net, Yongumuati, me are the Ninji Chambuchi, Shended should get our Ninji Chambu, the rest is oh yeah.
So here, then this next passage deals with the fact that the root of the Dharma that benefits others is this great compassion. So here it says the Buddhas have already achieved all their own goals, but remain in the cycle of existence for as long as there are sentient beings. So here, the Buddhas, Bodhisattvas first generated this attitude of great compassion, and then bodhicitta engaged in the various activities of generosity and ethical conduct, patience, joyous effort, and so forth, and attained this final abandonment as well as the final realizations. They engage in these practices for countless eons in order to gain all good qualities and remove all of their faults. And so Buddhas have achieved all of their own goals, but they remain in the cycle of existence for as long as there are sentient beings. And when this is really due to their great compassion. So someone like a Hinayana Arhat will, upon the attainment of their own aims, remain in this kind of state of peace, this extreme of the sphere of peace or the sphere of nirvana, sometimes called various names. But it's like if we are to say just attain our own goals and then think, you know what, it's okay, I'll just relax, I don't need to do anything else. As opposed to that, the kind of root of compassion that motivates bodhicitta or bodhisattvas means that they don't just want to remain in that kind of extreme of peace, but rather they want to remain in the cycle of existence for as long as there are sentient beings. And so this is because they possess great compassion. They also do not enter the immensely blissful abode of nirvana like the hearers. So considering the interests of sentient beings first, they abandon the peaceful abode of nirvana as if it were a burning iron house. So here, rather than a hearer or a solitary realizer arhat who thinks that once they have attained their own aims, they're sort of in this blissful state, a bodhisattva sees that as faulty to remain in that kind of blissful existence when they recognize that all sentient beings are tormented by various types of suffering. And these are sentient beings that have been our mothers and fathers, that have all been close to us. And so rather than just accept their own peace and move on, they wish to attain the aims of others. They wish to benefit other sentient beings. So for a Buddha who has that, or a bodhisattva who has that kind of attitude, they see nirvana as being like a burning iron house, as somewhere that you would really not want to stay in, but rather that something you would want to get out of as quickly as you possibly could. So for a bodhisattva, they rather are or a Buddha. Therefore, great compassion alone is the unavoidable cause of the non-abiding nirvana of the Buddha. So when we talk about this non-abiding nirvana, this means it's free from the two extremes, the extreme of peace and the extreme of samsara. So rather than remain sort of in this blissful state of their own, the accomplishment of their own aims, Buddhas want to return to be able to benefit other sentient beings, although they have that kind of ultimate peace for themselves. And yet they aren't of samsara. They aren't in the extreme of samsara because they're no longer under the control of their afflictions and karma. So in that way, they don't abide in either extreme. They're in a state beyond suffering, but they're not just sort of blissed out in their own blissful existence, but rather they remain within samsara to be able to benefit other sentient beings. And therefore, we should see that great compassion is really the root of all of the dharma to benefit other beings.
Oh yeah, that thing I do decision woman jugbe kapso da loben da ta so to chuje de woman jugbe chuje kapso kanji senye kyawe lo do punjo de sera kuje kange chena se senye se zawani chenbu songora kanji senye kyawe lo do punjo de kyawa sanje chomden de lo do pusung choba na shin pecha ro lo do pusung choba de ne shanje longche al pengi ordo kyawe lo do punjo de se sanje ji koma pusung choba to ban de se ora kanji senye kyawe lo do punjo de sabe danes o ninji chenbu de kyawe lo do to pusung choba yang ya ge sabe so da bu de songora kanji senye kyawe lo do punjo de sabe danes thongmar kecho sabe na shin ti yene sabe yore ne tabe orwa tande sabe dane pela chuda se pardo kone kondo ya pe tandale ya chudan rawa inchera sanje jo koban tobe chedo nyugudi kone kondo ya pe tandale chudan rawa re sera kanji senye kyawe lo do punjo de sabe dane pela chuda yuren do lonje nela mimba da bundo jobas tando de ya min son da ene mission da yuren bo lonje yorba kala saya yor chida so yor da tando mena ene yongmar do kanji senye kyawe sabe de pela lonje sabe dane pela chuda yuren do lonje nela mimba da bundo joba yuren beton dalia lonje yobate ene jebu mimba de kora tondo mamina pendo mardo jebu min sonani yering bu shenda lonche chogwa tina shin sanje chomden de komba kwen kuse yende kunden ki komba de top sona tin jebu mimba de bro o jebu mimba da bude mine ne sanje kwen ma se ba lonche yong ba de sanje chomden de song lab je song o kare ne te song de sanje te tu kyun tu je yora o tele semben nam je lonche ne sanje song be ne ngondo lambi koban taba tamji kimba tobji ge sung samu tazule tabaja sambaja kombaja je tele juwe yorno o jeju tama tele lonje mibata bure sere tatunda tama gecho sabena shere timene tondo yo mara pardo kone kondo ya peya de ya simba chutim sabala soba sanje koban tobji ge jutu ya pen kone kondo peya de ningji on ge yora shen donge da tawala Mesebelo di yudi te tabdinga tar simba chiyogo samne sanje koban tobala besu shu simba nage warno o chudabure tama jebu mimba na chosumba re sungudwa o de binde.
So this is, as it is expressed in Chandrakirti's great text, the entry to the middle way. In the homage at the beginning of the text, Chandrakirti states that compassion alone is seen as the seed of a conqueror's rich harvest, as water for development, and as ripening in a state of long enjoyment. Therefore, at the start, I praise compassion. So the sort of conqueror's rich harvest, or the great harvest of a Buddha, comes about from planting the seed of compassion. So this compassion is like the seed that will lead to such a harvest that we are able to enjoy. So likening compassion to a seed is indicating that it's important at the beginning. This is the initial motivating kind of cause that inspires us to engage in various practices for the benefit of others. And in the middle, as we are developing and moving along the path, this compassion is like the water that nourishes the growth of our various practices. So we engage in things like generosity and ethics and patience and joyous effort and so forth. This is really the cause of our effort in those practices is the strength of our compassion. So compassion too is important in the middle for the continuation, the development of our practice. And it is seen as being like the ripening of this harvest. So compassion is also important at the end. It is through compassion that this rich harvest of a conqueror, of a Buddha, comes about. And so it's, if we have like a harvest and we want to enjoy it, it's something that it needs to be ripened. It needs to be at the proper state. Well, compassion is what allows us to then get to the state of Buddhahood, where you have removed all faults and gained all good qualities, and have the ability, the methods for teaching others how to gain good rebirth in the future, how to gain the state of liberation and omniscience and so forth. And so that sort of harvest, that ripened ripening in the state of long enjoyment in activities that are beneficial to others, is also due to compassion. So here Chandrakirti praises compassion because of its importance at the beginning, the middle, and the end of our practice.
Oh yeah. Oh, the in the chitang and so Kim Jang Shore, Mara Chizo Nala Chita, Ya Le Tarba Tamji Kimba Ketchum Mashiva Yanaya, Zawa de Dang, Ra, Ratung the Trendu, Zawa Shen, Tung the Trendu, Zawa, Rana Yabuchuna, some Tawatan Trendu Yichamba, Shenla Yabuchuna, some Tawa Trendu Yichamba. Tingaran Chitana Yora, Punasanje, Dona Sangudwa, Kim Jang Dabsina, Tambudelia, Seve, Padama Dabsina, Telesawachene, and he Shapto Yabushu, Sangudwa, Padamala, Ningurcha Asura. Put a chuma chase on Genesis, Sosipu Putu Inada, and a chuma inada, Rangindao Inada, Magba Inada, Sazan in a Chishilpa, Zawagore Sangora. So I should call it Tobuchon and Jigmare, some Rang with a Tobutang man, sometimes a Kogiora. Call it Tawad and Tabachi or Kokiva, she Mezi Abuchi Yongore, some Chambat and Seves and Yogora. 不但充满结束这说是不一样的，啥上一样的这个这里早过了，他觉得身边去因什么错的都两个这里什么，然后呢先给过了呀，东边在那这个嘛的，台湾用也基本上每次也不给，特别是结果的什么过了，不但充满这每天把也来没家事，每天把的到什么的就能随便马工那你每天把用过了，随便光过的到处说这么的就能随便光过了。这随便这马个到什么的呢？上面要马的多，啊，到要马的随便光顾的女人这个马的身上，随便光下呢这上人有这要马吧，随便光顾马吧，俺说那么这马的那么上家里这个多，我的这当呢缺的马的呢，那么就工作上的多缺的马的不是，缺给买呢，这我的够要呢，每天把来每天呢缺给这些说是。这些当不永远的，基本也不永远的，这些人个也不永远等到的话，基本普通做不永远是个了。这等到了这里早的给学习的，早的程度的给学习的。我听到我那种，这个送个多，我这干啥？到龙居的，我的当这让了早的讲，许多年纪前没被学的。全球生活都是按照社会需要的吧，东西他们这的社会是看着社会那什么公标的，台湾他们这的那边是看着社特别社会那什么公标的，真的都是没有的。俺们就是说的社会有的，当代每次的给现在的搞来嘛就那，要不就那什么什么都给我嘛的，这样开始都是现在什么当嘛的呢，要不就那都嘛就那什么都是在这个当，有人没上路当头嘛是吧？那开始每次就是，去那是那被他人不上了当掉的，我这就开始了。当这人了，在我这边，许多年纪差的没被学了，全是什么都这个年纪的，我这个说的，在我这里学在我全部搞了吧，说的在我要的，说的想别什么要的，我都不买中南什么个对那什么个吧，我在我这中南什么个吧。说是地主娘给是吧？说是地主娘给买不起，新给说的到底这那点上不买到，说是地主娘给就上上，说是让新给上不了哪里啊？那对我去出那什东南嘛就那什么，这那些说是那没的怕嘛的，年底都不嘛就那什么，要个就那这讲这了，讲吧的这话说全部年纪全部的讲吧全部等着买的嘛多，抽的真给讲吧了哇，说的这话要的这话的。说讲吧要的讲吧的掉了喏，哦，这些，是俺那做的讲吧的早要的，原来讲吧的早就先给要嘛的，要不就东面没有过什么的东面用也就了买下来的，对吧？他过什么的就的了哪呢？东面没有就搞的，对吧？他也就搞的，就的要不就还过呢，就马上没把弄呢，对吧？东面用过的，我这就哪呢这个了，我要不就搞有什么呢？就的都在就上路亲戚吃当的，年末的，等着上路些的，那台湾用要嘛，东面用就了重要的，我这就告诉了。其他呢，也去给这一年的嘛呢，本来咱不领的这个现在没去干个，当不用的上看不到去干个，咱这不等这个要嘛了。就写出了之前是吧？这不着等着呢，在。新的这部真正那在山东这真正我带着带要的嘛的当部呢，啷个是真正那些那么的批的，是出了就真正这个要嘛了，看看人别就用过多，这讲把的这玩意儿用过的，说了，哦，当然东面这玩意儿够多什么，要不是够多啥，看着这个多什么呢？这部这是主要的新的那个看买单呀的看那这些的，可里上了可以的，东面的战队的。台湾的他们这个在外头有人白水这个多，这些的说是讲解明白现在的，他们的研究搞不牛的，他说也把都不买就那些年都吃用不多，现在这咱们来看了也说的也当的也挺穷了吧，嘛都这讲白的早也别忘了这是看个用过的，说的讲不过的，说是农民的讲不过的，制作的讲不过的，地方给你用过的，这样可讲不下的。新单领导送个多，上届个让的现在一个早的送不那些，我那是长毛他们这个第一早的，去的他说他们这全部等着买线呢， Digi Sawa de Chamdera. So, another day, Songua. So, Tawandula, Dunga Mendunga, Rava, Shin Nation, Dona Shimara. Shanda around the Chiba in some of the corner could watch a libidor. Two men around the Shanda Ganga Sado, so the Chinani, Yomodo, never guess and never says I said to set up teacher shadow. What among us? Yeah, teach it good. Okay.
So here, as individuals, as well as in society and so forth, we all need to have this kind of attitude of love for others. These attitudes of love and compassion are extremely important. And so when it comes to say we all naturally have a desire to be happy and a desire to be freed from our sufferings. So if we're working sort of in just this life, wanting those kinds of things, we're going to be able to achieve our happiness through having love and compassion for others. So if we have that kind of love and respect for others when we interact with them, that's going to lead to good causes. So even if we're not talking about Dharma, as His Holiness often says, it's important to have love and compassion regardless of whether you have a kind of belief in Dharma or not. But that this attitude of love and compassion is based upon a kind of attitude that sees that other beings are sentient beings, that they too experience happiness and experience suffering, and that they want to have happiness and they don't want to have suffering. So in order to really be able to develop this kind of attitude of love and compassion, we need to have that sort of recognition of others as sentient beings. So in this case, we need to not only have an attitude of love and compassion, but also practice patience, be able to be patient with other sentient beings that may react to us, although we normally maybe don't have that kind of patience. So love is extremely important, this kind of love being the wish for others to have happiness, and compassion being the wish for others to be freed from their sufferings. This is something that, even apart from any kind of like Dharma or practice of religion, is extremely important. So when we talk about like wanting things to be auspicious or to have sort of good results, this really, we have to recognize that it comes about from having these kinds of positive attitude toward others, having a kind of love and compassion toward others. And so bodhisattvas are those who have really taken this sort of attitude of wishing for all other sentient beings to have happiness and wishing for them all to be freed from their sufferings, taking it to that sort of highest level. We, however, most of the time when we are generating love and compassion, and again, these are attitudes that we naturally have, they are really most of the time quite sort of partial. We have love and compassion towards those that are on our side, but we don't have, say, love and compassion for those that we consider to be our enemies and so forth. And so what we have is not yet great love and great compassion, but only a partial kind of attitude. And so here, this is a situation where we don't always recognize what are the proper kinds of causes that are going to lead to the results that we want. So when if we engage in the wrong sorts of things, we're going to lead to bad results. So if we accomplish causes often that we think are going to lead to our happiness, they may end up leading to our suffering because we don't really understand what is the proper cause that will lead to the result that we want. So here, thinking about the world that we live in and the sort of way that we live, we should recognize that we haven't always had sort of all of the kind of amenities that we do today. We weren't always flying in airplanes and living in nice houses and having all of these kinds of things, but rather back when humans began, we were probably living in caves with very little material kinds of possessions. And so the sort of improvement, the development that we have seen in our world is as a result of these kinds of attitudes of wishing to alleviate our own sufferings and accomplish the happiness of others. So this is something where We all need these kinds of attitudes. And here, as it's being indicated in this text, this attitude of compassion is the root of both the accomplishment of all of our own aims, as well as the aims of others. So it's something that's extremely important, but we can also see the necessity of these attitudes of love and compassion aside from a kind of dharmic context. But most fundamental to this is being able to see and understand others as sentient beings, and not just those that are, say, close to us, but all sentient beings. We shouldn't regard them as being like sticks or sort of inanimate, but rather recognize that every other single being has the desire to be happy and has the wish to be freed from suffering. Sorry, that got a little bit long.
Oh yeah. Oh, did I shake our soda? Oh, the 20 kilometer. Oh, didn't do thunder Sanjay Sumbana Shira, Tashi Champion Doset in a Yungutua, Pamali Nigucha teacher. Tinashi, sorry about local Sugudatina, Tashi Basade, Kangi Mabata, Tanda Pusum Sabayunaya, Tashi Basigura. Just sorry about a love Sugua. Ganda Lagbe Sodan, that's hitting into Masma. Lagwa Chela Soya, the physician Bachaware, Tashi Bacuri Sungua. Sako. Sota de Chala de Soshi, Lega de Cheshin Bayena, and the Shana Panta go to Gorang, around Donalaya Kasura, Sori Bala Logo de Ese. Karas Shangi Gogo Pang Gogo Convechito, Shala Coede, Kakon Echido, Chazan Echido, Sori Bala Loso Doa, Sanji Chanjus and Batolia. Sori Balo Gores, Karas Shan, Ginega Gikogo. Tesa Kamba Kore, Dosalamga Kore, Saya Kore, Toya Kore, Tulo Koya Kore, Tesu Kanga Soyati, Tesu Yabu Soshani, Shana Pengi Ora, Shante Julan Dugara, Kangi Mitungi, Tete Julan Dugara, Nega Kitil Dugara, or Tin Dita Karsoda. Sorry, Balalo Gorese, Te Chazangan, Jig Lega Change so sorry about Loba in a Lega Mancha, the Milico, Chizo Chili, Koyasha Lega Chiteora, Kasha Shinkata, Kasha Lambasu, Kasha Tichigora. She's all paint and that Chigora, Kangi Mayata, Toya and that Chigora. The Kulu Samatan Shana, Tizanga Chedwa, the Sanjay Telo Lobsongua, Chanju Sambalia. Jazati and Duco Sodena Tangina. Shingadam Gachina, Cosamatan, Chanju Sambata, Champagne Chow to Gura. Tezukanga Champagne, Shanlia, Pangiris, Shell Panto, Lega in some such a Pamba to the Kanga say, Tablet do Yabu in some legs and the Kanga Kawade Dora, Cherry Dora, Nadujan Chesira, Kawade Dora, or Tin Duca Soda. Tezukanga de Nangmiki Nanda, Nangmiki Kanga say, Tunga Kanga say, not what to wait and the Lega Chisoji Lega Chivinanda, Lumbaji Lega Chivinanda Kanga, Michigora. Michigora Jagabina, Corso, Shana Pemba to Shana Neva Maja, Rangi, Jagabukoya, that in the summer than Yoda came to Kanga TV Judas do to Lega the Kankatia. What do you do? Tatoganga, Taco Kellen said, Oh, Kawashima Yore, Kunjo Yore, Chit, and they Kellen Malin Sigora. Then they came Malina Koki, what to go in Lega, which you will take your Dora, teacher Dora, Garochana. Konache Malina Kayomara. So he mass a cook on as the Kunjo killing messer. You know, make a chupa, Yabuche to Veneti, Kawade Dora, Cook Yawade Gomara, say Homara. Kawade Dora, or tea in the tongue it and the Karshi was the mounted to chest stars to Dora. Oh, Tanga Joke, Jawa said, somebody Jawa said, Lega to live at Chakodoa. Shan, the Pando Chido, Kanga say to Lega Chigusum, Shallow Kogopang Bashi to Lega Chigusambina, Tea Chamjeti or no. Such Chamjeti. Tarba and Tamji came about the dish and doing that around the Jumba Masa, Arazo, Chida Magic Tandalaya, Ranshan Yiga Tanda, Sawa Chiti or this Tisha Viva. To come to trim and mission. What did you Lamnan do?
So here here, there is the Buddha spoke in a sutra. Sorry, I don't have the exact name, but the sutra where he's talking about the need to respect one's mother and father and so forth, and various sort of auspicious practices. And in this text, he talks about that one should train in the various sort of crafts, like material arts. How do we make things? And so here, when we're talking about sort of the process by which we make material goods or do various sort of activities like that, these arts, these kinds of crafts are really for fulfilling the need of others. So when we talk about things like sort of maybe a building or trying to learn how to do pottery or something else like that, these are all sorts of arts or crafts that are for the purpose of fulfilling the needs of others. So people need houses, they need clothing, they need food. All of these things are things that are provided by others. And so most of us, when we're going out in the world and say working, whether it's at a factory or any other place, most of the work that people do is to fulfill the needs of others, whether it's working on roads or building houses or planting fields. All of these kinds of work, if we really infuse them with an attitude of wanting to benefit others, they can all become the practice of Dharma. All of our sort of everyday regular work can become Dharma based upon the sort of attitude that we have when we undertake it. So whatever sort of work we may be engaging in, whether it's we're just working for ourselves, or say we're working on behalf of our country, or at any kind of level, when we have that sort of beneficial attitude, that's going to lead to good results. It's not as though someone needs to even accept that the three jewels are a source of refuge, or have this kind of acceptance of past and future lives, really be a Buddhist, for example. But if they are doing activities that are for the benefit of others, then that's virtuous, whether they accept virtue or not. So here, in all of our lives, whether we're talking about sort of our everyday work or our practice of Dharma, these attitudes of love and compassion are extremely important. And when we are infused with that sort of wish to benefit others, then everything that we do, whatever it may be, will go toward that good kind of result.
Oh, the teacher, let me on show the thing on the much work up so good. Go on digging Tawang to change. Go some miss some time to do what to him and do. Go on digging Tawang to change. Minam Tawa longer memela, Minam Tawa on the neck of Saint Tawatia, longer Sago Namela, so what Tungi the Pomba and the Kangayanguto. Saheme Tungeme Mugishi, your Chinese, your Tamadikan, Sushi Tungi Yorno. The Minam Tawa longer memelas. Minam Tawa Yonete, Chagete, Nego Gitawa Yonete, longer the Ra. Minam Tawa longer memelas. Longer can it's in Junkina to be Tambuchi Betam Jeto Soda. So the call longer Yonet Tandalia, longer the TV curate, Yonet Tandalia, Chibatangure Soda, Shella Kangi Yobichiana. Oh, Kolia, Tinikangi say at the Chimbata, Tendile Kosode. Too many answers send Delia, Chimbata, and the Joshima so long, Mapumba, Longi Yabu, and Tandale Chimbatango Sunguado. Given the Winter, the Chiminum Town, Longi Memelas, Longi can it's in Jonkina to bet on which Chimbetam Jetose. Or tea in Dungazo, Longi Tandalia, Legaching to the summer, Kulu Samson, Kawade Duardo. Michizol Koya can get it ordo. They check it ordo. Or to Kanga Kasura. Tatanga Karishakerson. Namjunga Chizo Pen Legate, but the first Jurek Samutangure Sekiore. Shana Pemba Pendos, you're a cold pengy, some Tawade Duardo. Shana Kanga Mizola pengy, some Oh, did it. Tatanda. Jambada saw the Tanami in that Chiso in that shirt and then to shake and get share your thing in it. Simply Tandula, Chambada saw your Chikisil Chambat or Wa. Kanimachuna Samsage, Toa the trainer Samsage, teach something good to teach Keskamara, show him a Keskamandoa. 티선자 잠지됐다 랑다 신 상마가 때때 싸와데 스테시에도 와 되지구나 되는 만도션.
So here, again, quoting from Chandrakirti's Madhyamaka Avatara, he says that all beings, all of us want to have happiness. And as ordinary beings, our happiness is based upon various enjoyments. And so as enjoyments, our kind of wealth and possessions come about due to generosity. Therefore, the Buddha taught generosity at the beginning. So when it comes to our sort of temporary happiness, the temporary happiness or pleasure that we experience is based upon having various enjoyments or possessions, food, clothing, and so forth. And so that we might not be in a state where we are totally bereft of any kind of possessions and are struggling in that way. But the Buddha taught at the beginning that we need to have generosity. It is by being generous that we can say, fulfill our needs in this very life, and also ensure that we're not going to be born in a state where we have nothing in the future. And so here we should remember that if we can have this kind of attitude, not just say when we're doing our work in the regular world, we shouldn't just sort of think like, oh yeah, I have to do this work, this is just for work. But thinking about the ways in which we are doing it for the benefit of others, in that way, we can really transform whatever it is that we are doing into a practice of virtue. And especially if we have an awareness of these attitudes of love and compassion and basing our work on love and compassion. Even setting aside like the practice of Dharma, even setting aside being human, all beings need love and compassion. Even animals need love and compassion to sustain each other. And so we should recognize that at its most fundamental, these attitudes of love and compassion are the root of happiness of ourselves and others. Fundamentally, they are that root.
Oh yeah, tanda dinema di ningji chimbu kyawalaya tanda ngazo pamada chi nangmida sososu chawada sosu nangmil chawa kabu nyebul chawada tezo ko chawa chogri jero ba ningji chimbu da chi kasoro sosu chi ta nyebul so ti janjamado shenda kanga chapto yo mara ningji chogri jere ningji ta chunjori ningji chimbu mara dadi pa nyamba je kangal pa danda kyawachi soguyora telya tangyum de kuyore ningji chembu kumju kebar shegyor dinema telya tangbuta tangyum go tanda ngazu semje sosu nangda nangme sosu ke sheshe tikala ni nangme chero sosu kanyi chawnya re che lungba chikba sere nyende sero o teni chulu chikba sero chikba re chikti mi chikba re chikti ke kagaru che tende chegora o tezu kanga me masuna ningji ko nyamba che yungu mato 심지어 탐절을 안게 주고 니리 매번 닝지 전부 깨토 말와 다들 닝지 짜요르데 짜와 초리 전지 짜와래 되어라 닝지 총주 소소 낭밀라 되는 아주 주제스들이 센달 기게 마도 소소 가서들 기게 메가서들 기게 말와 닝지 기기샤는 코르세 동해 존에 삼겨라 다 닝지 전부 깨와라야지 야 탐절을 켜버지 쏘고요라 지당하라좀 개와세데 저저한테 최세데 직당 아주 실내 외바데 야야게 다했던데 지거라 참바다 세와서 라대완도 동에 메도레 샤야 랑게 니부터 대완도 동에 메도 존에 삼기와래 디파 자케제 야루 다했던데 최세거라 실내 외외바 생각하죠 참바자와서 침바서 서바서 또 생각하죠 요라 수팀세 팀수에 소주바 방기 야구면도 삼사를 텐데 요라 티야 konde 빼네 야게 땅거라 리트바디야 빼나 리드세 참바자와를 지냐 고자와데 다셔저저 셔다는 야로요라 간지 리딩아마에 사벨레네 페와서 자와라 솔로데다 콤버디나 칼라네스도 대저단데 리트바 셔지 삼르다 타과 삼르다 갸케셔네 야로요라코 롭조레 제베네 코 당부케게 까가 마시나 리트바 자자자 야로야야도가 어찌나시 잠바도 저와세도 다들 충중지 소설 요아레 년들 요아레 티바 갸케네 아니 야게타 ton달레 실라 나라주 심귤레 예바치야 야게타 고라 니바다 가주 삼루탄다 노르데바치요라 노르데바테 오 마레스 탄다스베네 소소 나 삼가 라완 징기요아레 nga sam nge me nga de tanda yo nge ma yo ba de nga keji yun do sam ko mo do tang jing sam ko do Tun je sera Tun je nge me nga tanda nga jing ba tanda nge ma yo ne sam ko do kende me ba keji yo do to de yang sinji lo lo so ja ko nam ju nga sam lo de ko do ti no de do te re me do ngo yo ne so ngo ne so ko ra ngo ne chana di ma re se ti lab gi wara Serza ko shirab gi cha to me shi ba mong ba to no ra to de sam lo ma re de se ngo yo ne so shin de ra tab gi cha to dang bu shi le chi ye ba de ya gong bi ta he tan da de do serza cham ba cha wa so ba so Shile yo ba nga zo ya je ta ya rik ba to kom ba che chigre ene nor de ba sam ta nor de ba te ra la lo ba chen ge nor de ba te ngo be ne so ngo ne te ma re shire bi cha to ya pe ge do ni yong do o de ji shena.
So here, again, we want to give rise to this attitude of compassion. And so the way to meditate on compassion will be taught from the outset. And so here we normally have this kind of compassion that really is limited to those that are just close to us. The kind of compassion and love that we have tends to be biased, whether it's just thinking about our own family, those that are close to us, or those that are in our country, or those that are of our religion. We tend to make these kinds of distinctions and separations into various groups where we are only really compassionate toward those that are on our side. And so this is not the kind of compassion that we want to develop, but rather we want to develop great compassion, not just a sort of compassion for those that we like and not having compassion for those that we don't like, but a sort of compassion that is that extends to all sentient beings without any kind of differentiation. And so here, when it comes to our kind of practice of Dharma, there are two different sort of categories. On the side of qualities like love and compassion, there is a foundation that we all already have. So things like generosity and ethical conduct and patience, we may have very little of that, but we all have the basic kind of foundation. We have the basic foundation to be able to be generous, to hold various vows, to have love and compassion. We have these attitudes of love and compassion, but they need to be enhanced. They need to be developed and increased over time. So if we engage in a repeated kind of practice, and there's a verse that encapsulates how if we are to sort of repeatedly engage in something of an accordant type, we are able to expand that infinitely. So when it comes to things like love and compassion, these attitudes, we have a little seed of that. We have the foundation of that, and then we work to develop them to a greater and greater extent. And so we already have in our mental continuum the basic kind of foundation for love and compassion. Whereas then when it comes to other types of attitudes, things that we're really ignorant about, like say our attitude with regard to an I and the sense of self or I, we tend to hold on to our self or our I as being permanent. Like the person that I was this morning is the person that I am exactly right now, that there's something that's sort of always there and unchanging. So those sorts of attitudes that are not in accordance with reality are things that we actually learn by reversing our old way of thinking. So unlike sort of compassion or love, where we already have the seed, when it comes to things like grasping at a permanent self or grasping at a truly existent self, we actually have to reverse our ignorance, get rid of that kind of mistaken attitude in order to replace it or develop the right kind of understanding. So there are these two types of ways in which we sort of develop our various qualities. There are those that have the foundation within us, like love and compassion, that we just need to foster and make grow and increase more and more. And there are those that don't accord with reality, are kind of mistaken attitudes that need to be undermined through a proper sort of understanding. So I think we're at the time for today, so we'll have to stop there.
Thank you, Tuche. Thank you very much, Geshe. Thank you, Katina. And thank you, everybody.
Oh, yeah.
We will do the dedications now.
Oh, yeah.
May the spiritual teachers who lead me on the sacred path, and all spiritual friends who practice it have long life. May I pacify completely all outer and inner hindrances. Grant such inspiration, I pray. May the lives of the venerable spiritual mentors be stable, and their virtuous actions spread in the 10 directions. May the light of Lo Song's teachings dispelling the darkness of the beings in the 3 worlds always increase. Idam Guru Ratna Mandala Kampiriyataya.
Oh, yeah.
Due to this merit, may we soon attain the awakened state of Guru Buddha, that we may be able to liberate all sentient beings from their suffering. May the precious Bodhi mind not yet born arise and grow. May that born have no decline, but increase forevermore.
Oh, yeah.
We see each other next week at 10:30 Mountain Time.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, 8:30. I'm getting confused with the Mountain Time and Pacific Time. So it's 9:30 Pacific Time, 8:30 Mountain Time. Right. So, okay, now please, what is it? Okay, now I get it. 8:30 Pacific Time and 9:30 Mountain Time. Thank you.